Give the warning to everybody. Welcome, folks, for those joining us. We'll get started in just a minute or two. In fact, welcome. If you're just joining us, we'll get started in just a minute. Okay. Just even sent out a little reminder. Hi, everyone. I think we could just go ahead and get started. We're recording this in case you didn't hear the message, but welcome. I'm Erin Sterwinski. I'm the manager for learning engineering at the Open Learning Initiative, and I'm so happy to be joined by our friends at University of New Hampshire, and I'll let them introduce themselves and talk about their work. So Catherine, do you want to go ahead and start?
Sure, I will just take a moment to share my screen.
Of course.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming and joining us today and learning about our Student Cognition Toolbox. My name is Catherine Overson. I'm the Associate and current Interim Director of the Center for Excellence in Innovation in Teaching and Learning at the University of New Hampshire. And we have worked for over a decade, maybe 12 years or more, on study skills with students. And we began working in this endeavor by working with faculty and helping them to develop and implement strategies that help to promote student learning by using information that we know about how students learn. Without fail, these interventions have been shown to benefit learning, and in particular with less prepared students, oftentimes helping to close the achievement gap. We continue to work in this regard. Our most recent work, however, is with students directly in the Student Cognition Toolbox, where students are provided with instruction under what circumstances and how to use the most appropriate study strategy for the kind of learning goals and objectives that they face. With the Student Cognition Toolbox, the students are empowered to become the best learners that they can be. So today's talk will be on the Student Cognition Toolbox, empowering students to become learners. And through today and tomorrow, we're going to introduce you to Student Cognition Toolbox and describe the iterative process that we've used to improve and refine each edition of the Student Cognition Toolbox. We're currently finalizing our 4th edition, set to be released in time for the spring 2021 semester. So that'll be released very shortly, and provide evidence of its validity and efficacy in promoting learning. So that's the plan for these next 2 days. So with that background, I'm going to go ahead and begin. I do want to have a few acknowledgements here. First of all, our Student Cognition Toolbox developers. Some of them have come and have since moved on, but there are a core number of us who have been with us from the beginning, and that they are listed. I also want to acknowledge the Davis Educational Foundation for their support in making the Student Cognition Toolbox possible. So we are very thankful for them. And I'd also like to acknowledge our CNU collaborators, without whom we wouldn't have been able to make this possible. So we're very thankful for all of the work and the support that they have given us along the ride. So for this morning, both myself and Lauren Kordonowy will be presenting. So I'm going to give the agenda for my portion, which is be the first hour or so of the presentation. And during my presentation, I will be talking about choosing a cognitively based study strategy, about the Student Cognition Toolbox, what makes up the modules, about the general Student Cognition Toolbox and module template. I'll give you a tour of the Student Cognition Toolbox, and I'll wrap up with some Q&As afterwards. So we'll begin with choosing a cognitively based study strategy. And within that, we want to know, how do we activate and enhance student learning? Well, it turns out that it depends. And what it depends upon is really 3 questions. The first of which is, what kind of knowledge does your student need to attain? In other words, do they need to know facts, concepts, principles, something else? What is it that they need to attain? What are their learning goals? And then secondly, what kind of learning process is required for your students' learning objective? So in other words, do they need to learn facts and associations, rules, classifications, or categories, or principles? Do they need to make sense of things? Do they need to have deep learning? What kind of strategy will you recommend and use to promote learning of those objectives? Will it be quizzing, self-explanation, elaborative interrogation, or something else? So what we like to see is an alignment between the kind of knowledge they need to attain, the learning process that was required, and the kind of learning activity that they are going to do to help them to achieve those goals. So with all of that background in mind, now I'm going to go over the Student Cognition Toolbox and what kind of strategies that we have currently underway. So Student Cognition Toolbox at the center. One of our modules is Test Enhanced Learning, and that is practice quizzing, actively retrieving from memory material that you previously studied. Self-explanation, which we describe as using question prompts to help students describe their understanding of new information during the learning process, and that is thinking about their prior knowledge in the context of information that is new to them, that they've just acquired. Elaborative interrogation is a variant of self-explanation where students make connections with information that they already know. They might know that information through lecture, through class notes, readings, videos, etc. And they respond to how and why questions that help them to understand how concepts interact with one another and how they might be applied to new situations. So the fine difference between self-explanation and interrogation is that prior knowledge. With self-explanation, they may or may not have the prior knowledge. They compare it to what they may or may not know. With elaborative interrogation, they usually do have that prior knowledge, and they're learning to advance their knowledge to make more explicit connections. Worked examples are a step-by-step demonstration with explanations of each step regarding how to perform a task or solve a problem. The key here is that the students use the worked out examples that are provided for them, and then they go ahead and explain every step along the way. So there's a component of self-explanation that makes the work examples so helpful in learning. Distributed practice, and that is spaced practice as well, and that is a schedule of study in which an item or concept is studied across different times in the same learning session or across different learning sessions, distributed practice. And then finally, a related concept, interleaved practice, which is a type or a special instance of distributed practice in which the learner moves between studying related subtopics of a single learning session across multiple learning sessions as well. And so we have modules currently of all of these student cognition toolbox. You'll learn later that we're going to be adding to this and doing some combining as well. But I'll go into that a little bit later. So for now, what I want to do is to go over the general student cognition toolbox and module templates. So what it is that students encounter when they go into the student cognition toolbox. This is going to be in broad strokes here, just so you know kind of the setup. So one of the first activities the students engage in is the study behavior inventory. And this is a list of currently 14 items or 16 items now. We actually increased our survey to include both shallow and deep processing prompts that we ask students to respond to, the degree to which they typically study in these activities. Half of them are shallow, half of them are deep processing strategies. They do that first, and then they get into the actual study skills module at some point. They engage in the learning activity that is directed regarding that module. In 3 of the modules that we have this sort of pre-activity where they engage in that activity. They're exposed to some material to be learned. In our default student cognition toolbox, the material that they're going to be engaged in as they practice the strategy is from an open source psychology textbook. And so we have them read a little bit about that and then engage in whatever practice activity they're learning about. Then they get into the study session lesson proper, where they're exposed to the presentation of the study strategy itself. They're giving some definition as to what it is and what they've just done in the first part. They practice using the strategy in a variety of contexts. And we ended up by asking them for an assessment of how well they've learned the study strategy in the form of a quiz, a checkpoint quiz. At the end of the entire student cognition toolbox, after they have engaged in all of the activities, we do a post-study behavior inventory. And in this time, we don't ask them, how do you typically study? But we ask them, in light of what you've just learned in the student cognition toolbox, how do you think you're going to be going about your study based on what you just learned? And so we have a pre and post measure there. The importance of this, you'll learn later when we talk about the assessment process tomorrow with Victor. Okay, so we have already completed 3 pilots at UNH. We began the fall of 2019 with our first edition. We then followed in the spring of 2020 with a revised and refined edition based on some feedback. Lauren, in the next session, will explain to you the details of the actions that we went through to make that happen. And we did the same thing for our most recent edition, fall 2020. We are also already working on our spring 2021 version, which I mentioned earlier. And so that is again based on some feedback that we've had. So up until now, we've been able to reach approximately 4,500 students from UNH in a variety of courses. These are just some of the courses that we have implemented the Student Cognition Toolbox. So you can see it's a wide variety of courses throughout the university. And so, and we have more this fall. So with that little bit of background, what I want to do now is take you into the Student Cognition Toolbox, what it looks like, what the students experience, and let's go ahead and go with that. I will stop sharing this screen and I will enter into another screen. There we go. Okay, so I hope you all can see this. If you can't, just let me know. This is the Student Cognition Toolbox as the students will see it. And I just wanted to point out to you the structure of the toolbox. This is our most recent version being August through December 2020. This is our third version. And the syllabus is starting off with module 1, which is an introduction to the study strategies. After students engage in that, they then begin the practice quizzing module. Next is the self-explanation module, and you'll see that these modules have a section 1 where they engage in the activity using the content from the open source textbook. And section 2 is when they engage in the lesson proper about the study strategy. Self-explanation, the elaborative interrogation, and then we have worked examples. This only has a section 1, which is the lesson proper, and space practice, interleave practice. So we really have 6 study skills module bookended by the introduction module and the summary module, which kind of pulls it all together. So what I'm going to do is take you through a tour, give you a sense of what the students will be experiencing in first the introduction to the study strategies. Click on that. Good, okay, so we have our toolbox there to remind students what this is all about. We open up with a list of the authors and what the toolbox is made, and our thanks to the involved contributors. And we give them a little bit of background on the Student Cognition Toolbox. We help them to learn how to navigate the toolbox. And I have to tell you that really hasn't been an issue with our students. We don't know if they're actually reading how to navigate or if they even need it, but we provide the information on the various ways they can navigate through the toolbox with some screenshots and so forth. So we provide them with that information. Right away, one of the first things that we have them do is to report with the student behavior inventory. I will take you through that survey and share with you the experience the students will be undergoing. So, okay, you can see that I have already selected these. I had done these prior, but students will read the questions here. I'm going to actually make this a little bit bigger so you can see the entire screen. So students will respond to how they agree with the various statements. Again, some of them are deep strategies and some of them are shallow strategies. They report their agreement with these strategies on a scale of 1, not at all true of me, to 6, very true of me. After they're done, there's a little submit button. They would submit their responses there. And then they will go back to this screen. And this is where they will get an individualized report of how they reported on how they typically study. You can see here that the deep strategies are the ones on the left. In this case, they're purple. And the shallow strategies are on the right, and they are green. And to remind students which the questions were and how they responded to each of the questions, the prompts are right here. So they get a view of how they typically study. We also follow up with a debriefing statement at the end of this, pulling it all together. And basically what we say is to review your study behavior inventory, and what we've noted in the past with many students is that students who study more using the deep strategies and study less using the shallow strategies tend to perform better. And the Student Cognition Toolbox is to provide information that will help them to increase this portion. And so that is their introduction, and that is our first glimpse at how students typically study. Next, we provide them with an overview of the entire course, and we provide them with a brief couple of sentences on the definitions of these various modules that they will encounter through the Student Cognition Toolbox. We give them an idea of the components. We give them instructions. We want them to engage in each of the modules in the order at which everything appears. Okay, we also introduce them to this, which is the study strategies selection table. And this is a kind of map to help students to determine what is their learning goals and or objectives, and what kinds of study strategies are appropriate for that goal and objective. And so we provide them with this, and we actually show this same table at the beginning of every module with the kind of learning that that module is associated with, and we highlight that row. So the way to read this is that we first ask students to help to figure out, well, is their learning goal? Is it facts, associations? Is it complex rules and classifications? Is it more deep principles and so forth? So they select what it is they're trying to learn. Here are some strategies that they can use to learn that kind of content. Here are some techniques that they can use to help them. How does it work, and so forth. And then some things to keep in mind. And so we present this at each module, and it helps to remind them that there isn't really one size that fits all, that they have to think about what their learning goals are and select the strategy that's associated with it to help them move forward. And so we provide this. There's also, they can obtain a PDF of the table, and they can print it out if they want it for later use. So I'm not going to go into all of these right now. You can read them later. So we look at an overview of the strategies, and these are some additional successful strategies that students can engage in. These aren't strategies that we thought that would make into a complete module. And so we do list them. We list some things such as desirable difficulties, time management, using feedback, and also the notion that one size doesn't fit all, and they have to really tailor their learning strategy according to their learning goals. We also, here's some additional tips and so forth. Regarding the strategies you choose, etc. Okay, so what is not covered in the toolbox? We also provide many students wonder selections, and we have this after every module. We have a set of these kinds of questions, and we pick the ones that we think would be appropriate with the modules that they're in. And these are questions related to shallow strategies that students often use, and we put them in the form of a question as delivered by a student. Why do I have to change the kind of study that I typically use? Why can't I use one kind of studying? I typically go and ask my teacher or TA right away to help. You know, why can't I just do that? And why can't I just copy my notes verbatim? I usually do that to study. Why don't you list that? You know, things like that. So that's that. And then moving forward, we have a checkpoint. It's just really, in this case, it is a, take you to it, start attempt. In this case, it is a 3-question checkpoint quiz that helps to assess the degree to which they have learned the material. And we also use this for feedback purposes. Lauren can explain to you that as well, but they submit it and then they get their response. So let me see if I can get back here. Okay. Right. We also have a selection of reflective responses for students. The reflective responses for the introductory module is a little bit different than it is for the other modules, and I'll show you them when we get to them. But this one here is asking them to reflect on their study behavior inventory report and to start thinking about how it might change over time. And how important do you think it is? So we begin the process of helping them to develop metacognition skills in their thinking about their studying and so forth. At the end of each module, we also have a link to further information should they want to do that. And this is going to be useful for students, but also for teachers, to help them to learn more information if that's something that we want to do. I will share with you that when we've worked with certain teachers and implementing this, a lot of teachers want to review it, and they actually want to plan their own learning activities that are consistent with the learning activities that students are learning in the Student Cognition Toolbox. And they also want to make sure that they have the language consistent, that they're using the same kind of language as is compatible with the Student Cognition Toolbox. And so that is very nice to know. So students and teachers alike can get to more information here. Also, students might be in a course where maybe it's a first-year course where they are learning about study skills, and maybe the Student Cognition Toolbox will be assigned for that course, and maybe the teachers will look at some of these further resources and maybe even assign them for the students in addition to the Student Cognition Toolbox. And so there are many good reasons to pay attention to this, this section. So now what I'm going to do is to take you through one of the modules. And in this case, I'm going to take you through the practice quizzing module. It happens to be the first module that shows up in the Student Cognition Toolbox. And in the beginning, students are informed that they will receive, in this case, a section 1, where they're going to read through some material and practice the strategy. And in section 2, they will learn about the strategy improper. Okay, so this is an example of a reading passage from an introductory psychology open source textbook. We give them a reading section here. They read through that, more reading, and then they engage in the study strategy for that lesson. In this lesson, it's practice quizzing. And so given a multiple choice question where, as a learn by doing, they're given a multiple choice question, they select the answer, they can get immediate feedback. Whether they're right or they're wrong, they can reset it and try again and so forth. And so they practice that. They then get a little bit more reading. In this case, the next learn by doing comes pretty quick afterwards, and they practice it again. So it's very short, very short. We have in our recent modules or a recent edition of the Student Cognition Toolbox is to include a practice quizzing survey. And Lauren can explain to you the reason why we did this, but it also provides us with some information in terms of in your past studies, have you completed quiz questions while trying to learn academic material? It gives us a sense of have they ever done this before? And if so, they respond. So it really serves two purposes. One is to give us information, and also to provide students with documentation that they've completed this, because it shows up in their grade book. Okay, let's see if I can find my way back. Okay, here we go. Okay, and now we come upon section 2, which is the lesson proper. Okay, as I mentioned earlier, students will again get this table, the study strategies selection table. And you can see that this line is highlighted because this is the practice quizzing module. We begin by explaining to them what they did in section 1 as they were reading, and that they took this quiz. So we begin to talk about that. We then go on to describe what practice quizzing is in a narrative form. We have them complete a learn by doing activity. from something that they have just read. And then we have a series of more information. In this case, we have the information conceptualized in a series of tables. And we try to keep the order of the modules the same, or to be consistent from module to module, so students get a sense that, okay, this is the order that we see things happen. We have a narrative section, and then we have some information in table. Oftentimes it's what is it that, best, when is it best used? When using the study strategy, what are some things that you want to consider? How to incorporate study strategies into the study moving forward. We give them some suggestions of how to do that. First of all, determine the kind of material it is that you're going to be required to learn or produce. Different ways they can respond to questions, ask the partner to ask them questions using flashcards and so forth. So we give them a number of ways that they can incorporate this into the study. We have another learn by doing activity. And we've also created a series of videos, and these videos accompany each of our study strategies modules. And we have a student who narrates, who is starring in the video, and the student speaks about using study strategy directly. We have written the script for these videos so that we know in advance what the student is going to say, and it complements everything that's in the module. It also adds to the module. I'll give you a little sense of what this is about a 4-minute video. We keep them about 3 to 4 or 5 minutes, keep them short. And I'll give you just a little preview about what this video looks like.
Hi, my name is Nen, and I'm a senior genetics major here at UNH. I will be telling you all about the use of practice quizzing and how it can improve your academic performance. So, what is practice quizzing? Practice quizzing is a study strategy that enhances learning and retention by retrieving from your memory course information to which you have been exposed. For example, through lecture, reading, doing something in a lab, or even watching videos. This can be as simple as answering questions, deliberately recalling information, or bringing information to mind. By retrieving information from memory, or even attempting to, you increase the chances that you will recall the information in the future. Practice quizzing also helps you understand the gaps in your knowledge.
Anyway, so that was just a brief preview of what these videos look like. This is Nin, and she was excellent. We have her in a couple of our videos. We have a variety of students in our videos, and she did a couple of them. There's also a learn by doing that is associated with the video, and we provide them with a wrap up. And we have this at the end of every module itself. We also have a selection of many students wonder questions, as if what happened in the introductory module. This one has to do with why can't I cram? This one has to do with rereading. And this one has to do with making a study schedule and again, asking for help right away. And so these are the ones that we put here. After they have completed the module, we have a checkpoint quiz, and it looks just like the other. We have about 4 to 5 checkpoint quizzes at the end of each module. I won't take you through them right now, but it looks just like the one in the introductory module. Once they've completed that, we have a series of reflecting questions, and we ask students about their learning strategy that they've learned. How is it new to you? Have you used it before? How is it different? Do you have any questions? This is all good for feedback for us, but it's also really good for students to begin their metacognitive development, have them thinking deeply about those study strategies and how they might use them. We ask them for a confidence level. How confident are you that you can engage in this activity moving forward in your studies? And then we ask them another set of questions looking at actually applying these study strategies. What course do you think that this might be useful in? Provide an example of how you might use this in your course. And why do you think that this is well suited for the course? And so it really gets them to think deeply about the study strategy. And then we have, again, at the end of every study strategies module, we have links to additional videos, websites, and so forth. And so there is that for students as well. I'm going to take you through a self-explanation module just very quickly, just to show you that they're all the same. In this section, again, the students will get a section 1 where they practice it, and section 2 where they learn about the study strategy proper. Again, for this default module, we have the reading section that has to do with psychology, introductory psychology. They engage in a learn by doing, but because this is self-explanation, we don't have practice quizzing here. We don't have our learn by doing isn't practice quizzing. It is, in fact, a self-explanation series of prompts. And so the prompts that we have used are: describe the information that's new to you in this section. How do these ideas work with what you already know? Explain your prior knowledge and these new ideas and how they might work together. And ask a couple of I wonder questions that take you beyond the material that you have just encountered. So the first prompt is designed to invoke prior knowledge. The second, is to describe the information that's new. The second one is designed to invoke the prior knowledge. The third one is designed to combine the two and maybe to fill in some gaps or to help them to recognize the gaps, maybe to apply the new ideas together. And this one is designed to develop curiosity about the topic. And then they engage in that survey, which is, in the past, have you used this kind of strategy in your study? So yes or no. And what I wanted to do is to show you that, let me go back to our reading section. In the beginning of each one of these study strategies, I'll go to practice quizzing, for example. At the very beginning, we have a set of learning objectives. And our learning objectives for each of the modules are the same. And they are described, they're going to describe the study strategy and identify the learning circumstances that are appropriate for the study strategy and apply the study strategy to study material. So all of the learning objectives are the same from module to module, with just the study strategy changing. And then I'm going to take you through our summary module. Here. And in our study strategy summary module, we begin again by having them do the study behavior inventory. And in this case, as I said earlier, it is a post inventory, and we ask them to forecast how they might use study strategies moving forward. And you can see this is exactly how it will look for the student. I have not previously completed this, so I will go ahead and complete it as a student might complete it. Documenting how I intend on studying moving forward. And again, these are the same questions. Half of them are deep and half of them are shallow. The star here means that they're required. So we made this so that students have to submit responses to each one of these prompts in order to get a report. So once that's submitted, looks like I've forgotten something. There you go. See, it wouldn't I didn't do that on purpose. I promise you, it just happened. Okay, there we go. Let's see if I can find my way back. I have so many windows open now. Okay, here we go. So I would go back. And again, I get a report, the deep strategies and the shallow. And what we hope that we will see is these bars elevated and these bars decreased. That's the goal of the student behavior. And that's the goal of the study, the student cognition toolbox. We also have a set of reflection questions where they're asked to reflect on how they initially reported and how things have changed over time. We have, again, the selection table. Many students wonder. And a checkpoint. And so the checkpoint that we have moving forward will be a 10-question checkpoint for the students. And I believe that that is the end of the tour. So let me take you back to my slides. Okay, so that's the end of the tour. I'd like to summarize everything about the Student Cognition Toolbox in the various modules. And so summarize the introductory module. Students begin by doing a student behavior inventory. They then get an orientation to the study behavior inventory and the Student Cognition Toolbox. They get material that is not covered in the modules, and they are continue to engage in some reflection activities. For the 6 modules as a whole, what happens is that they get experiential activities, and this happens with the first 3 modules in the current edition. And they also they are exposed to the 3 learning objectives, that is describe, identify, and apply. And then they are shown the study strategy selection table, in which they are able to choose the appropriate study strategy for the learning goal or objective that they're engaged in. They have a series of study strategy lesson learned by doing activities. They get a video of a student describing the strategy in use. They are also exposed to some questions that are many student wonder questions that target, for the most part, shallow study strategies and explain why they're not so useful or so recommended, and alternatives for that. And they're given a checkpoint quiz. After that, they have some reflecting activities in a couple of ways, and they are given a list of additional materials. So this is how the setup for all of the modules look. For the summary module, they again do the study behavior inventory. They have some reflection activities, and they have a complete source list. I didn't show you that complete list. It's quite lengthy, all of the resources that we used in producing the Student Cognition Toolbox. And so they are welcome to review these resources, and teachers can use them for student learning activities if they feel that would be helpful to the students. I'm thinking of students who are in these study skills courses that they might be taking as first-year students. So I want to mention some information about moving forward our plans. And we have the Student Cognition Toolbox that I just showed you is what we're calling the default Student Cognition Toolbox. It has that introductory psychology material in it for practice purposes. But what we're also going to do, based on some feedback and based on just our thinking about retooling these modules, we've decided to merge merge some of the modules into two separate modules. For example, the self-explanation module and the elaborative interrogation module, we have for the spring semester, we are going to merge those modules because the material is very similar and with just some fine differences. And we believe that doing this will help students to understand those fine differences a little bit better, and also to reduce the amount of reading and repetition that they might have to do. And the same thing with space practice and interleave practice. We're going to merge those modules because they are similar and that they both have to do with scheduling the study. And so it'll help to make the material more succinct and help them to notice the similarities and differences between the two. We also have plans to add 2 additional modules at this point, prediction-based learning and dual coding. These are both under construction at this point, and so we will release those at some point in the future, if not the spring, then perhaps the following semester. Also wanted to let you know that in the works, we have a number of discipline-specific student cognition toolbox courses. The default one had the introductory material for the section 1. In this case, the material will be related to the discipline under which it is given. And so we have a statistics version that is complete now. We're just ready to go into production, and we will be piloting that at UNH in the spring. So that will be coming out to you shortly to be open. And we are also going to be working on a chemistry version, a biology version, and an anatomy and physiology version. Those are the ones that we see happening relatively soon. And there will be others along the way as time moves forward. So that is the end of my presentation. I am happy to answer any questions or receive comments about anything that I presented.
Catherine, this is Victor. I want to just make a couple points. One about the study behavior inventory. I saw that Raphael was on the list here of people attending, and so we wanted to acknowledge that Raphael, Darren, we worked with him early on. They actually developed that survey tool, which we're using for the study behavior inventory. But my understanding is that that tool's available to anyone using OLI materials, and that you could put your own survey questions in there. And one of the nice things about it is those survey responses are downloadable in terms of the analytics that are available with OLI. So that was just a thank you to them. The other, just as a preview for the presentation that I'm going to do tomorrow on our efforts to document, we could call the validity of this tool that you've described. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about research that we've done that assesses the relation between how students behave within the OLI tool to other measures. For example, to background data, like maybe their high school rank or their prior GPA or SAT scores, some individual difference measures that we've administered to our students, like need for cognition, academic self-efficacy, but also to their performance in an academic course. You might have mentioned this, but I'll say it again. For the students that we've done the pilot projects here at UNH, all of those students are enrolled in an academic course in which they complete the Student Cognition Toolbox. So somebody's in an introductory biology course and the teacher's working with us, they do the Student Cognition Toolbox at the beginning of the academic semester, well, they're also having all their performances documented in the course. So we're going to be able to relate how they behave within the SCT and their exam scores, for example. So it's just a little preview about tomorrow.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Sure.
So I think Victor explained what I was going to ask. I was wondering if this is an independent course or if this is a toolbox that is applied to a course. And what I heard is that you can use this apply to a specific course. It's not that you do an independent like any other course with a number within the schedule, right?
You could do it either way, and you could, like, a student could be enrolled in, I mentioned, an introductory biology course or an intro psych course, or whatever, chemistry, and the teacher for that course would also register for using the Student Cognition Toolbox. And the way that we've done it is that we just put a link into our course Canvas site. And then once the students click on that, the first time they register, and then everything is linked up together. But relative to your question, if let's say that students were at a school that has a first year seminar on how to be a college student and studying and learning and metacognition and all that. So, like, for example, a lot of community colleges have learning assistance courses for first year students. So somebody that is the Student Cognition Toolbox could be the course that they use for their own course number. But there's also the capability that students could use it as independent learners, right, Aaron? They could just access it. Now, nobody will have any data except them, but that would be a possibility as well. So any of those ways are possible.
I have a follow-up question. How many students participated in this toolbox use?
We have, over the last 3 administrations of this, over 4,500 students have participated at UNH.
Is voluntary?
We work with the faculty, and we get faculty volunteers who work with us, and we have suggested that they make it as part of their assignments. There have been faculty who have made it optional in the past, and what we find is that in those courses, it's usually the students who are already doing well who do go into the Student Cognition Toolbox, and we want to make sure that we reach all students, in particular the less prepared students. And so we recommend that when a faculty works with us, that they make the completion of the Student Cognition Toolbox to be worth course credit. And that course credit is up to them. Oftentimes it's for participation points, or it's for some 5% of their overall grade or something like that. And so we found that we get more compliance when we have students complete it as part of the course requirement.
Thank you.
Stop sharing here.
If I can say something else.
Sure.
Okay, so just last night I had a student emailing me. I have 130 students in Organic Chemistry 1. And she said, I'm doing everything that you are providing, the practice problems, the asynchronous video. She's not coming to the Zoom meetings. And so one of the tables that you showed, that is the type of learning and what you should do to learn, and some explanation. I can't remember how you call it, but I think that table would be very useful for the student to identify what she's doing wrong. I think that the fact that she's looking at the material afterwards and she's not attending is a factor for her not to have the opportunity to think at the proper time and to ask questions at the proper time. So I think that's very useful, at least for me.
Yeah, and in fact, we think that it's really at the core of the Student Cognition Toolbox, which is to help students to identify for themselves the nature of the material that they need to be learning, and to provide them with this map, if you will, to help them to determine what it is. We also have a version of this that we have prepared for teachers. So when we go live with this in the spring, we'll have a so-called manual for teachers, and helping them to select if they want to pick and choose the strategies that they want their students to engage in, helping them to determine their learning goals and the appropriate strategies that go along with that if they want their students to focus on that. For our pilots, we're asking the teachers to have students do the entire Student Cognition Toolbox. So there's no reason to not do that. It's helpful for all students. But moving forward, the teachers may be able to select which ones they want for students to focus on for their courses. And providing them with that table also helps the teachers to decide which strategies to recommend for their students. It's also a way to help the teachers, if they want to use that, to develop strategies of their own. So if they want to incorporate their assignments in a manner that is consistent with the learning goals they have set, then they can use that as well.
Thank you.
Catherine, how long does it take approximately for a student to go through this? Did you mention that?
No, I didn't, but I'm glad you brought that up. It takes approximately 10 to 20 minutes per module, altogether about 2 hours, roughly.
Okay.
We recommend that students, as you might imagine, not sit down and take it all at once. So that's why when we work with faculty at the beginning of the semesters, when we meet with them and talk about how it's going to look on their, we use Canvas, how it's going to look on their Canvas site, how students will engage with it, the instructions, and how students will be assigned credit for completion and the amount of credit they receive in their course. So we meet with them, we give them a preview of it as well. We give them 2 weeks, we recommend 2 weeks for the students to complete the Student Cognition Toolbox. And at the beginning of the semester, of course, we want students to set off the semester on a good note, knowing these study strategies moving forward. And so we recommend the first 2 weeks, and we also recommend that they inform their students not to sit down and do it all at once. If they do it in bits and pieces, it's certainly manageable, 10 minutes here, 20 minutes there, and they'll get it done within 8 days if they do one module a day. So it's perfectly manageable, taken in, short bits like that.
Great, that's perfect. I'm also really encouraged by the amount of open-ended questions there are too, because I'm sure you get a lot of rich data from those. And of course, the teachers can read those responses too and get a sense of where their students are in their study strategies. So I love the mix of question types that you have.
It's really been valuable, and Lauren will go into all this in more detail about the iterative process, but as an editorial observation, I do want to say that the nature of these responses is really heartfelt. I mean, the students are appreciative of it, and they are enlightened by new ways to learn these things that they might have known about and used it only in one way. Gee, I didn't know you could do this, and oh, I think this is going to be good for my statistics course. I'm looking forward to using this. I mean, we have gotten some really amazing responses from students from the qualitative portion, from the reflection, that has been useful. I mean, it's been heartening for us to see this, but it's also been very useful.
Great.
We need a bunch of senior honors thesis students or master's students to go in and do content analysis studies within the data. I mean, the data source
Right.
is so rich,
Mm-hmm.
we're going to be mining it for a long time.
I bet.
Hi guys, this is
Hi,
Hal.
Hal.
I have a question based on those last two comments. Actually, I was wondering if you're considering now writing into the material itself some of the the direct student feedback quotes, as well as some of the results as a form of motivation, so that students can see when they enter the course that there is evidence that doing this can help make them more successful.
I would like to speak to that too, Hal. So the video itself, the videos are a way for students to receive that sort of information directly from another student. So Nin and the other participants, they say that this is helpful and this is something that they can use in their actual courses. So far, in lieu of having text to that effect, we have the sort of spoken word from the students, but I do like your idea of adding those quotes. That's not something we've done so far.
Yeah, I like that idea too.
Yeah, that would go in the introductory module, and it's a form of meta teaching, right? And documenting to students. Look, other students have gone through this. This is what not only they've said. I mean, the research presentation I'll do tomorrow, there's a version of that could, of course, be presented that's not technical at all, that really just says, look, if students do this, especially, for example, if they're under these circumstances, we've documented that this is how they improve in their courses. So in other words, just sort of a qualitative description of that. That's a great recommendation.
So this is a good segue into Lauren's presentation, but I do, I think maybe a 5-minute break would be good. Give some folks time to get fresh in their coffee.
Okay.
Please come back and join us at, let's see, 8 after is what I have, 3 after right now. So we'll start at 11:08 and have Lauren talk about the iterative improvement process that they've undergone on this. So come back in a few. Thanks,
All right.
everyone. Okay, so welcome back, everyone. We're going to continue our presentation. Lauren, if you want to.
Great, thank you so much. And I'm gonna make sure that everyone can see my slides.
Yes.
There we go, much better. So thank you for sticking around and coming back. I look forward to talking about our iterative development process over the last 3 semesters, implementing the Student Cognition Toolbox. My name is Lauren Kordonowy. I'm the Science of Learning Project Coordinator at UNH at Seattle. And my role actually has been to physically deploy the Student Cognition Toolbox. So when we talk about all the different course sections, I actually add the Student Cognition Toolbox into each of those course sections and interact with the instructors and the students over the course of the entire semester. And then I also help with the editing process. So I'm really excited to tell you how informative that has been for our content in this course and how it has evolved over the last 3 semesters and continues to evolve in our current edition. So our refinement and development, as I said, has occurred between fall 2019 and then the edition that went out in spring 2020, which was a larger deployment. It's been larger each time. And then we did more review and modifications again, not only between the first and second editions, but also between the second and third editions, which was just deployed. And we're now done with our deployment for fall 2020. We've collected all of the student responses from 2,500 students from this last semester. Each time we've refined and modified the Student Cognition Toolbox, we've made small tweaks, which then yield big benefits in terms of student understanding and clarification. There's always room for improvement in a course, much as course instructors revisit their course material each semester and make small changes. This lends itself really well in the editing platform Echo to doing the exact same thing. So we review many types of resources from the Student Cognition Toolbox, and all of these inform the changes that we make in different ways. So the first that Kathy has also already described in some detail is the study behavior inventory. So we review the results of the pre and post study behavior inventory. We also look at learn by doing activities, the responses, the checkpoint quiz responses, and we review the reflection questions that Kathy has talked about and which also came up in the question period before. Finally, because I implement this in the courses, I get emails from instructors and students. And that actually makes me uniquely privy to any sort of confusion or queries or questions or enlightenment that students or instructors would like from the Student Cognition Toolbox, which helps us close the gap and improve the Student Cognition Toolbox each time. The first thing I want to talk about today is our study behavior inventory responses. So to evaluate changes in study behavior plans for the students, the plans of the students reflect in their responses for taking the SCT, the SBI at the beginning and the end of the course. We can look for changes in deep and shallow strategies. Students reported their intentions to increase more deep strategies in their study in the future. However, they did not report that they would use less of the shallow strategies. Therefore, we made modifications in the Student Cognition Toolbox pertaining to increasing information about the disadvantages of relying upon shallow strategies. These modifications included additions to the introductory module content, particularly to the section about deep versus shallow processing. And we also added and modified some questions within the SBI survey between fall and spring of last year to change several questions to address this, to address the shallow strategies. We also added many students wonders questions that really identify different shallow strategies that we know that undergraduate students are using. For example, one of the ones is why copying your notes verbatim is not particularly helpful compared to deeper strategies. In addition to looking at the study behavior inventory, the SBI, we can also look at checkpoint quiz data. And we can review the data for the checkpoint quizzes in every single module. So these quizzes are located at the end of the introductory module and also at the end of each of the 6 study strategies modules. We kept in mind that low scores might be indicative of either unclear module content related to the checkpoint quiz questions or even the learn by doing activities. So the source of confusion could be within text, within the learn by doing activities, or within the questions themselves. So if the question itself in the checkpoint quiz was unclear, or if the answer was unclear, or if there could be some clarity regarding the distractors that we used. And accordingly, we modified either module content itself, so the text, the learn by doing, or the checkpoint quiz questions. So it is very informative for us to look at the responses to the particular checkpoint quizzes and see if there's areas that we can improve content within the modules. We also really heavily rely on these reflection questions when we're looking at iterative improvement. The value of these reflection questions cannot really be hyped enough because it is through this typed feedback from students that we can ask about their understanding of the modules and whether there are some modules that are more understandable than others. So we review these reflection questions for every module. And for this, for what I'm talking about today, we ask a series of reflection questions, but the ones that I'm interested in for my talk right now are, do you have questions about this study strategy? Does the study strategy you just learned about make sense? And in addition, in the summary module, we ask how understandable the study strategy modules were and whether there were particular modules that were more or less understandable than others. And we got a variety of feedback from students, some of which was, I really valued this particular module. For example, the module on practice quizzing, and I can use practice quizzing differently in the future. And then other feedback could be anything from, ooh, I really understood all of the modules except this one, or I found these two modules to be a little bit more confusing. All of that is very helpful when you're going through iterative improvements to help us identify what modules we can really hone the message for. And so we made modifications as appropriate to address any questions that students had that we mined from the reflection question data. Okay, I'd like to provide just 2 examples of reflection responses from students to show you how we evaluate those and how we meet those questions within our iterative improvements. So the first is from elaborative interrogation. So I'm going to allow you to just read the statement on the slide. So in response to that student comment in the reflective questions, we were able to directly modify the content in those study skills modules. So what we did for that was to modify text and also tweak some of the figures in both the self-explanation and the elaborative interrogation modules. So we could actually identify where the student was not understanding the difference between the level of prior knowledge in both of those study strategies, because there is a subtle difference in the prior knowledge required for self-explanation and elaborative interrogation. So as a team, we can look at those modules and identify changes that we want to make. So the second example is actually from the self-explanation module. And again, this one's shorter, but I'll let you read it. We actually have already shown you through Kathy's presentation the many students wondered that directly addresses this question. Why shouldn't I study by copying my notes verbatim? Well, because research has indicated that this is not an effective study strategy because you're passively engaging with material. So you've already seen how we've addressed this particular question from students. So in addition to the reflection question feedback, I also said that I'm the implementer of these in all the courses. So I keep track of all of the emails that I receive from students and instructors. And also I meet with instructors and email them throughout the semester to ask them how things are going during the deployment. And one piece of feedback that we received early on in fall of last year was that the narrative component was long. So that means that students and instructors commented that they would like to read less text. Everyone would always like to read less text, but that's good feedback. There's always room for improvement there. And we responded to that by doing a couple of different things. One was shortening the reading activity. So that psychology text activity that Kathy scrolled through today, that's half the length of the original activity. So we want students to have the opportunity for experiential learning for the study strategy. And we don't want to take that away. That's a core component of the Student Cognition Toolbox. But we chose to shorten that substantially to decrease the amount of time students spent on section 1 for the 3 modules that have that reading activity component. The second thing that we did is streamlining text within the section that describes what the particular study strategy is. So for example, section 2 of practice quizzing, we removed text that we felt was in any way redundant or extraneous. and we converted text to tables, because another kind of related piece of feedback we received from students was that they really liked the tables and figures. They found those to be very helpful. They enjoyed reading the tables and figures. So we converted paragraphs of text to tables and figures wherever possible. Finally, we removed supplemental resources that were embedded within the modules and instead placed them at the end of particular modules. So if there was a video that we thought would be very enlightening for students to watch, to learn how to do worked examples for chemistry, we actually moved that to the end of the worked examples module. And we moved all of our citations, all of our literature sources to the very end of the summary module. So anywhere where we could move material out of the heart of the module, if it was sort of reference material, and put it at the end of the module or at the end of the course, we did. Okay, so this spring, I received about half of the emails that I received were for student requests for assurance that they had actually completed the part 1 reading sections. So half of all of the emails I received. So these are students that did the reading section and then moved on and learned about what self-explanation, elaborative interrogation, all of these strategies were. And in the gradebook, there's a checkpoint quiz score associated with those section 2s, with all of the sections describing what the different study strategies are, but there was not a checkpoint quiz that was paired with the reading sections. So directly in response to that assurance that students needed, what we implemented in this latest edition was a small survey question. A very small survey question, 1 question in fact, at the end of the reading sections that will be visible in the gradebook as a check mark. Students wanted assurance and now they have it. So for example, at the end of the self-explanation module, they're simply asked, have you done this before? Have you ever self-explained material to yourself? The answer is yes, no, or unsure. That simple addition eliminated all of the emails that I would have received this semester with that particular query that I received in the spring. In addition to evaluating each of these individual components in isolation, looking at the study behavior inventory results, comparing the post and the pre-tests, evaluating checkpoint quiz scores, looking for the feedback from students, we read through the entire Student Cognition Toolbox as a team, holistically. And that allows us to make additional modifications, such as reading the learn by doing activities in the context of the rest of the text. Is there anything that we can clarify? In addition, for this latest edition, we have actually added a large checkpoint quiz at the end of the summary module. By large, I mean it's 10 questions instead of 3 or 4. And these 10 questions are actually questions for content from each of the preceding modules. So we think this is going to add a lot of value for us in terms of evaluating whether students, when they read through the summary module, how well did they understand the material in worked examples several modules ago, or elaborative interrogation, self-explanation. And these are harder questions that often allow for students comparing and contrasting the study strategies, which is something that ultimately they'll have to do on their own when they're determining which study strategy is most effective for them for individual learning goals. Finally, Kathy has already mentioned our plans for future module work. I'm merely bringing these up because these are going to be things that happen in the next edition. This is part of our current review and modification process. We are merging single related modules, we are merging 2 modules into a single module twice. We're merging elaborative interrogation and self-explanation together because they really go together. And we're merging the two modules that are related to timing of study together. Both interleaved and space practice are highly related. We're also building additional modules, the prediction module and the dual coding module. So this is all part of our next round for review and honing the Student Cognition Toolbox. Okay, So today I've described how we've used different components of the Student Cognition Toolbox, ranging from reflection question responses to actually reviewing the statistics for the checkpoint quiz results. And we've used all of these different materials to review and refine each iteration of the Student Cognition Toolbox to make improvements. So far, we've deployed 3 editions of the Student Cognition Toolbox, and we're currently working on the 4th for spring 2021. And the reason that this is possible is because we can very quickly refine the Student Cognition Toolbox using Echo. So the Echo editing platform makes us able to review things and make changes quite quickly. And we get very prompt feedback. We're able to review learning dashboard information. So we can use the learning dashboard to review quantitative results from the quizzes and the learn by doings, and also qualitative results. So responses to our reflection questions. And then obviously the huge body of data that's available through the analytics, through that big data download that happens, that allows for us to look at all of the responses and even the number of clicks that students have. So we would also like to take this time to thank the OLI staff, because without them, this would simply not be possible. We have sent questions before and we always get quick responses. Everything is always like answered and super helpful. I know sometimes when I'm working in the authoring platform, I come across something that I don't quite understand. And we just want to thank you for being so responsive, and also for building beautiful tools like the survey, because clearly we're using the survey a lot. And at this time, I've spent my 20 minutes and I'd like to welcome questions or comments.
Thank you, Lauren. I'll start with the first question. I love that you're showing off this iterative improvement process and talk through that. We haven't had a lot of folks really, talk through it the way you have, to show what kinds of things what kind of data you use and what you do against it. I'm wondering, just my first thought was, what's the difference in terms of time to develop initially versus time to iterate? Do you find it gets easier to iterate, or are you spending just as much time?
It's less time to iterate than it is to develop, by far. So I would actually say that that is somewhat analogous to when you're a course instructor developing, for example, an introductory biology course for the first time. It is always going to take much more time to develop a course than it is to improve it. And each time you look at your course, it will take less time to improve it. That being said, we do spend substantial time reading through the course and reading through the feedback and looking at the data and having it inform our changes. But we make different types of changes, I think, through each iteration. Mm-hmm. So the focus of the first iteration was, do the students understand the material? Are there large gaps in terms of the students actually being able to process the information? And then also, what are they getting out of it in terms of learning gains, which Victor will speak to tomorrow. So through each iteration, we can kind of focus on different things. So this next iteration, where we're focusing on merging modules, that's a very different type of refinement. So yes, it takes a substantial amount of time to do the iterative improvements, but it's well worth it. And we also expect it to diminish each semester.
Great, thank you.
I'm Victor here. Let me just make an observation. One thing we could have done rather than working with OLI is we could have written a book on how to study in college. Oh wait, there are lots of books out there that are called How to Study in College. So why didn't we just do that? Well, I think there are a couple reasons. One of them is that by authoring this course, this book, in effect, that has a lot of other features to it through OLI, is that instead of, if we wrote a book, we do a lot of work and proofreading and this and that. Maybe we'd even have some students read some chapters and so on. But then once it's done, it's done. And you can ask, like, how many books actually go into a second edition, which might be 5 years later or something. Is that by doing it the way we've done it here on the platform, is that as Lauren has documented here, is we're always continually getting data. And what is the hindrance to making improvements? The only hindrance is when we were able to sit down and work on it. In other words, it's right there. And because, of course, we have grant support, we're able to sit down more often and for longer periods of time and so on. But it's a different way of trying to develop, academic course material. And from our point of view, this is sort of like the first kind of entry into doing this kind of work. We've done it sort of the old-fashioned way, right? As you write something, you publish it, and then that's it, it's done. Maybe you get another edition. Is having these data available to make these improvements that Lauren, let me just say that what Lauren was talking about, getting all those emails. Again, such a small thing, but for the benefits, not only to her, but the benefits to teachers down the line that use the SCT, just putting in that little, have you ever done any of this stuff before for section 1? Yes, no, unsure. It shows up in the grade book. So rather than teachers down the line who use the Student Cognition Toolbox getting whatever, 50, 100, whatever number of students they have, like, do you have a record that I did section 1? There it is right now. It's there. It's just a minor little thing, but it's going to help teachers down the line, well beyond when we're finished on our end.
Yeah, I have one more question.
I also
Sorry.
sorry, I also wanted to speak about the nature of the work between developing the Student Cognition Toolbox initially and the iterative process, is that the work is different. We're still working, I think, as much. It's just that it's different work. Initially, it was like we split up the modules. We all worked on a module or two. We shared it with one another. We edited it, and we were developing it from scratch. But in the iterative process, we already have that baseline, but we incorporated the addition of data. So we have data, qualitative, quantitative data that can help to inform improvements. And we also were looking at the editorial process on a more narrow focus. So we were looking at the module itself together in light of what we know about how students have performed, and in light of sorry, something happened to my Zoom here. and in light of what we know about the students' responses. And moving forward, we made even finer and finer refinements, and we looked at sentence by sentence as well. And so we're still incorporating the same amount of work and the same amount of energy toward it. It's just the nature of what we're doing is a little bit different.
Yeah, thanks. Along those same lines, something that I think a lot of course authors struggle with is that reduction in reading. So as you were talking about that, I wanted to ask the question, how did you feel about that? Like, how, when you realized you had to reduce the amount of reading, was it a difficult thing? Did it feel like, oh, I'm cutting out things that are important? Or did you really, were you able to take a look at it and just say, okay, here's where we make the cuts? I'm just curious as to how you felt about that process and reducing the reading, because that's,
it's funny because when we first produced it, we thought we had this excellent product, and I still think it was really good. But we were surprised that they said, oh, we want to reduce the reading, and we thought there's not a lot of reading anyway there, so what are they saying? And so it just really forced us to step back and be very critical about what we have there, and to see where can we consolidate information? Where can we eliminate redundancies? And how can we shape this narrative so that it's in a more concise table? And I found that work to be really creative and exciting. I really enjoyed it. So at first it was like, what do you mean you have these criticisms? But when we looked at it again in light of their feedback, we were like, oh my goodness, yes, of course. And we found that every step along the way. And didn't we, Victor and Lauren, after every edition, we thought, this is wonderful. This is so much better. We cannot improve on this. But every time we find that there's something that we can tweak. It's amazing. So that feedback is so important to us, and we think makes a increasingly better product.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that when you submit papers for peer review, right? The peer review that you get for papers is often, it's very to the point. And often, you know, someone asks you to dramatically change a section or to cut a paragraph. This is part of improving your work when you're publishing. And this is just a unique situation where we can have direct feedback from students on what's working for them when they learn. And just as you shouldn't, you know, be offended when a reviewer gives you comments such as this needs improvement or that needs improvement, and then you make that change to your manuscript before you resubmit, I kind of feel the same way about this. And you should never be so wedded to a particular paragraph or sentence that you are not willing to part with it for improving the overall quality of the product in the eyes of the students that are actually reading it. So I don't find it to be terribly difficult to cut things out personally, because I know that that's just improving the product for the student experience.
Thank you. And you have evidence that it works, right? Like that what you've done really made a difference. So that's also very important. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that experience with us. Anyone else have any questions? Feel free to just speak up.
You know, I'm looking at the list of people and that are on here. So as we've talked, as well as Catherine and Lauren have talked today, is that, you know, what we used to do is we would, and Gloria, this relates to a comment or question you had before as well, is that what we used to do is that we would work with faculty and help them to design an intervention in their course. And in fact, we often did those as experiments where we had a control group or control condition. And we would, so for example, with self-explanation, is that we would work with a biology professor to incorporate self-explanation activities while students were reading text material. And then we would work with the teacher to develop exam questions that actually tap the kind of learning that self-explanation facilitates, like making relations between ideas, for example. And then, so that they would then do that. And what we have lots of good data, and that's what I was saying is, you know, one of the people on there, you can see the name Mike Melville. Mike was a doctoral student at the University of New Hampshire, now at Eberly Center. And when he worked for a couple of years in the teaching and learning center that we all work in. And he did that kind of work. And we're working with a teacher to develop interventions, to have a good experimental design, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the kind of work we did. You know, Kathy was working 10 years ago on developing, you know, now we call it a low tech, then we thought it was like the cat's meow, a low tech PowerPoint version of how to study in college. You kind of look at it now, it's kind of quaint, but it worked as well. It's that, so, but the thing is that what we came to the realization of is that, well, you know, how many teachers are we going to be able to work with to implement these really good strategies? And what happens when a student, you know, let's say was in this biology class and, you know, that their academic performance was boosted well beyond what it would have been had they not used self-explanation or whatever the technique was. when they go into the next, to organic chemistry, where the teacher says, I'm not doing that stuff, right? And so the whole idea was to try to make students, empower students to learn these skills and materials so they can transfer them, because that's the big thing, right? Is far transfer, is to be able to apply these in unique situations. And people talk about spontaneous transfer and so on. So it's always good to be able to work with teachers directly to help them develop these interventions. That's what teaching and learning centers are about, in part, is that, but to be able to teach the students to do it. And then if they can get a teacher that integrates these into their course. So if they're in your organic chemistry course and they did the student cognition toolbox, is that they would work on a worked examples module. And that worked examples module, you could give assignments when they get to sections where they have to do step-by-step problem solving, to say, okay, what did you learn back there in that worked examples cognition toolbox module, and how can we apply it in this context? So anyway, just sort of like a general statement I'm making about how all this stuff can be brought together.
And one of the pieces of feedback that we're getting from instructors this semester in this, changing learning environment is that they're thinking, and we also agree, that it's more important than ever that students are able to take some ownership of learning and of their own learning and applying the right strategies to different learning goals, because there's kind of like less oversight if they're not in the classroom. It's less easy for you to be checking in on what learning strategies your student might be using unless you're intentionally taking time to do that. So the beauty of this platform is also that it's utilizable in any sort of learning environment. And if there's any changes that we decide to make to kind of target sort of the learning culture that's going on right now, we can also add those in the next edition based upon any feedback that we get from students.
Great.
This is Gloria. One concern is how much time it would take for the student to go over that plus the course material in under the current conditions. I calculated the time that they needed just to be sitting, listening to the videos, going over the PowerPoint, during the practice problems, because it's a flipped classroom or flip teaching approach that I'm taking for the Organic 1 course. And after I calculated everything, without a lot of extra material, it was 7.5 hours. And then for 9 hours was just a very small window that is there for them to do any extra activity apart from the ones that are required. So how do you integrate another tool to what they already have? And our students sometimes take 5 or 6 courses. And so there is that constraint that I don't know how to manage.
If it's over the course of 2 weeks too, then you can think that it's only an extra hour per week and it's only the first 2 weeks of the semester. But I'd like to think about it in terms of times that they'll save later. So if they're studying more efficiently, then they're actually going to be studying more effectively, potentially using less time later in the course. So I really think that the benefits to what they might save in time, not rereading their notes, not rewriting things verbatim, will be time well spent for an hour the first week and an hour the second week of the semester.
It's like the TV commercial, pay me now or pay me later.
Right, and they can spend 10 minutes or 20 minutes on a single day on one of the modules. So they're not investing 2.5 hours in one setting along with your 7 or 8 hours that they're required to do. They're just doing it in small pieces, which is how they should be doing it anyway.
Yeah. And Lauren, with most of the faculty you've worked with, you brought this point up to them and said, well, instead of just saying over the next week, you should do the student cognition toolbox and you need to have it in by Friday night at midnight or whatever. I mean, don't you actually work with them that a part of it will be completed on Monday, then there would be another due date on Wednesday and another due date on another day. In other words, to help structure it so they in fact space it out.
Well, we send reminders periodically. So what we often see actually in the analytics for timestamps is that students go in, they do a little bit, they leave, they go in, they do more, they come back. So that is reflected in the timestamps for each of the quizzes. So students seem to be, for the most part, self-pacing. And I think that that's also because they get these little reminders, oh, you should be working on this. This is due in 10 days.
Yeah. Yeah, and one of the things, we talked about this the other day at one of our meetings, in looking at timestamps is, somebody that started module 1 at 1 o'clock yesterday, and they finished the final checkpoint quiz at, what did I say, 1 o'clock, at 1:10 p.m. yesterday. In other words, they spent 10 minutes, they were just going through, right, punching, we can actually quantify that. And what we would expect, for example, is that those students would do very poorly on the checkpoint quizzes, but also they're not going to show the benefit in their actual course exam. So we haven't analyzed data that way yet, but it was something that we were thinking about. And Hal, related to your point about sort of doing a little telling them how good this could benefit you, is that we could, if we can document this, which I'm sure we can, is it really is to your benefit to do little small chunks of this over a week rather than cramming it together for your benefit. And the data show that students who do it this way benefit more.
I think they'd love to hear that they don't have to do it in huge chunks. That it's actually that it's better that way.
Yeah.
So I'm fascinated by how you decided which study strategies to include, and how you're deciding to the ones that you're going to incorporate in future iterations. I'm guessing that through your experiences before developing this course, that you found that these are the most helpful, I guess.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's how we began. We've done a lot of work with retrieval practice, so of course that had to be in there. We did a lot of work on self-explanation, showing the learning benefits of that, so that had to be there. We haven't done any work with elaborative interrogation, but there is literature on it, so we included a module there. We thought it was similar to self-explanation, so we thought it was appropriate. Worked examples, we have worked with faculty on worked examples, and so we thought we would include that. Of course, we do spacing, and we've done studies on interleaving. What am I missing? We've done work on all of them, I think, except for elaborative interrogation. So that's how we started. I also teach a course on multimedia principles. And so the dual coding comes right in there. So we're going to be, we're in the process of developing that module as well. Prediction-based learning, we haven't done any work on that, but I think that we're excited to, and there is evidence about making predictions, hypotheses, and having students do pre-tests and so forth as they move forward. So we're excited to do that as well. So that's kind of how we developed our student cognition toolbox, and probably how we'll move forward.
Yeah, and there's a huge and growing literature on science of learning, particularly as applied to real academic settings, both at pre-college, but at college level. And in fact, Lauren and Kathy both mentioned, is at the end of the whole student cognition toolbox, at the very end, is a bibliography, if you will, by topic, with 30 references to it. I mean, these are things that we've read and studied. Both Kathy and I have taught a course on science of learning. We published an edited book a few years ago that has chapters in it by world's leading science of learning people and, focusing on what's the basis of the evidence for the techniques. John Dunlosky, who cited many places he published a paper, well, he and several colleagues published a paper a few years ago again, evaluating the state of the evidence on the various techniques and both in terms of what's the validity evidence that they work, but also sort of the practicality of it. So like, for example, practice quizzing is easy to do. It's really powerful if learning facts, concepts, etc. But self-explanation is a really powerful technique if done correctly, like with worked examples and otherwise, but it takes more time. So so John trades off these various things. So, it's what Kathy said. It was our own experience in doing work with teachers. Oh, these work really well when teachers use them, but also looking at the research evidence. I mean, obviously at CMU, I mean, you've got Ken Codinger and others. I mean, these are world's leading learning science people. That, we cite their work, all over the place in the Student Cognition Toolbox.
Yeah, it seems like the ones you've chosen are the most powerful, for the work that you put in, which is fantastic. I also really like the collection of the Many Students Wonder, because I like how they're written from the student perspective, and a collection of those in one place might even be interesting, as an FAQ for students who have who are wondering about the study skills they employ themselves and how effective or not they are, or what to do instead, right?
Right.
I really like that.
Well, Gloria's student writes her in saying, I don't know what went wrong. I did this, I did this, I did this, I did this. So what a lot of students will do is, well, if they didn't do well on something, they're thinking, well, okay, I read the stuff 10 times. I need to read it 5 more times.
Mm-hmm.
Or if I tried to memorize things this many times, I should, so, and that speaks to Lauren's point about, pay me now or pay me later, about efficiency of the techniques. But you're right. I mean, you've got to persuade students, because these are lifetimes of habits.
Yes.
Which of course were largely reinforced in pre-college academic settings. And they worked often because the focus was on the next high stakes exam on the next day, about transfer or maintenance or, and a lot of the assessments are really sort of the facts. What year did, so-and-so do this or that, as opposed to, what were the causes of the Civil War and what do they have to do with today? Different kinds of questions.
Well, I have to tell you, I've been pretty in tune with my own learning strategies most of my life. I mean, that's why I'm in this field, because I've always been fascinated by this stuff. But I just recently learned, like last year, about strategic reading. I mean, I've spent my entire life, I've gone through college and master's program, and I'm just now realizing that that's a strategy you can employ and help. So these types of courses, what you've put together here is so valuable to folks, because you, like you just said, you could go your whole life and not know that there are different ways to study that are more efficient and effective.
I'd also like to think that this offers a really good opportunity for instructors to refresh themselves on the way that their students should be learning, because I think that the value that is now being placed more largely on students using effective study strategies and spending time on this in courses, like there's a paradigmatic shift towards teaching students more actively about study strategies. I think that this offers an opportunity for instructors to kind of think about these, if they read through the modules that we've written, and then to think about what they could do in their course to really sort of shift, maybe even just like a lesson plan or two to like help with critical thinking about a particular aspect of the course, or to think about whether or not they could be interleaving their material just a little bit more. So I think that this allows for more of a conversation too between instructors and students about how to improve learning in the course.
Yeah, it's great.
Excellent point, Lauren. Victor and I did a presentation to the nursing department. The whole department was interested in adopting the Student Cognition Toolbox for their students to succeed. And one of the faculty members, I think there were 12 or 13 people in the room. One of the faculty members said, I'm going to go through that toolbox because I want to know what language you use, what terms you use. I want to be able to use the same terms. And I also want to redesign my course so that I assign assignments that are consistent with the strategies that you recommend. And so I've heard that from other faculty too, who have been interested in the Student Cognition Toolbox. So good point.
If I want to use the material, where should I go? How do I reach your course?
So I was just going to ask, when is this available, so that I can start to talk
Yeah.
to.
So we were on our team. We've just been discussing that we're finished. We're ready to go for the default for the spring live, in the world, and that our plan was to. I'm looking at Hal and I'm looking at Aaron here.
Yeah.
Contact to say, okay, we want to submit this to start going live, because there's obviously a process on their end. I mean, the process we've been going through now is, we develop our iteration, we send in a message, we go to quality assurance, we do some checking, we go to production, but it's all internal to UNH, pilot testing, for lots of reasons. One, so we could get the background data, but also the course data. But now it would be to submit it to them, and then whatever length of time it takes to go through that quality assurance process would be that. But Gloria, what I will tell you is, I mean, we don't do this for, in general, but I can send you a little email that has about 4 or 5 steps that you can enter in to our quality assurance current version and go in. I mean, you're not going to be able to manipulate things or anything, but you can go in and look at it, go through the whole thing, and it'll look, like what Catherine showed you. And we've done that, for ourselves and reviewing, and a few other people, but I'd be happy to make that available. We just didn't want it out in the world until we were ready to do that. But
well, thank you. I have to.
Our plan is to have it available for deployment for the spring.
She won't. She'll tell you. She'll tell you if she doesn't like anything.
Yeah, I would like to apply some of that to my Organic 2 course, which is going to be in the spring.
Yeah, and it will. Yeah, and it'll be available for the default would be available online, but I can start sharing with anybody now that wants it. Maybe.
The one that's now doesn't have the merged module, but the one that will be released in the spring will have the merged modules and the addition.
Right. But the content is there. So I mean, if you want to see what the things are, I would just say you could. What would be the best?
So we'll send out an announcement when we have it ready on our production server for folks to go and create a course from, and we'll reach out to the folks, just as you heard about this this presentation, we'll send an announcement out when it's ready, and you can contact either me or Hal to get it set up for you in your class.
Yeah, and if you would like to do it, look at the material ahead of time, just send me or Kathy or Lauren an email, and I'll send you an email that tells you how to get into it.
And I'm just going to say, Gloria, check out extensively in the worked examples module. There's a lot of supplemental resources at the end that include chemistry. So worked examples is very important in organic chemistry, and we have a lot of supplemental resources for that.
Right, and the worked examples module for the new edition that is coming out in the spring is much more amplified, and there are more clear instructions of how to conduct worked examples and how to have students engage in worked examples. So that was a big modification that we made from this fall to the spring. So that will be out new and amazing in the spring for your use.
Okay, thank you.
Well, we're at time, everyone. I just want to, thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Victor, Catherine, and Lauren, for your presentations and your discussion with us. There will be another presentation tomorrow about well, Victor, I'll let you talk about, give a little teaser to that.
Well, what we're going to do tomorrow is going to look at the behavior of the students within the Student Cognition Toolbox in relation to some background measures that we've collected on them, but also, as we said, that everybody we're working with is in the context of an academic course in which the student is enrolled. Also, that behavior in the Student Cognition Toolbox in relation to their academic performance as assessed on exams in the course in which they are enrolled. The focus of our research to date has been on establishing that we actually have a valid tool, right? I mean, we could have developed something and, is it any good? Does it work? Is it really help students learn, which then they're able to apply, et cetera? So our focus is really being, I think about it as sort of the internal validity. I mean, I think what you've already seen today from Catherine's tour is it has face validity, right? In other words, it looks like it looks like a tool that teaches you how to do study skills, but is it really? And so I'm going to focus on that, and I'm also going to preview that once we've established, which we think we have, that we have a valid tool, our next step once it goes live is to start doing some in vivo experiments. So where we actually do real experiments and manipulate different features to see if we can maximize the benefits. So, like in a chemistry course, is it sufficient to have the Student Cognition Toolbox up front where they do it, say, in the first 2 weeks? And then in the course, the teacher might remind them, oh, worked examples here. Or, which is one of the experiments we plan to do, is to have pop-ups within, say, the OLI Gen Chem course, is to have pop-ups come up when there's a problem-solving activity in the course material, and the question comes up saying, okay, you're about to work on this. Which of the techniques that you learned about early on would be applicable here? And how might you go about, and then we'll give them some feedback. So in other words, to give them reminders throughout the course about where to apply this stuff, because they're not all going to be in courses where teachers are going to be either motivated, interested, or prepared to do that kind of thing. And then we also have a new theory, well, it's a framework, Mark McDaniel has come out, and it turns out that the Student Cognition Toolbox is structured almost identical to the framework that he says is necessary and sufficient to promote student learning through study skills. And we're thinking of doing some causal modeling of that model, that framework. So that's a preview.
Great, thank you. I can't wait. So same link tomorrow, 10 a.m. Eastern time. Please join us tomorrow to hear more about the Student Cognition Toolbox. Thanks,
Thank you, everybody.